The fist landed on the polished table with a crack that ricocheted off glass and steel. "Does anyone here speak Japanese?" the billionaire thundered, and the boardroom fell into that awful kind of silence where even the air seems to hold its breath. He raked the room with his eyes, executives, advisors, hotel managers, until a small voice rose from the shadow of a potted palm near the door. "I do. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, share where you're reading from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories can travel. Enjoy the story." Title: Nobody spoke Japanese. The billionaire was fuming. Then the maid's daughter replied perfectly. Chapter 1. The girl who polished the brass. The Ashford International Hotel wore the morning like a tailored coat. Clean lines of light pouring through glass, the hush of wealth, a symphony of soft footfalls and wheeled luggage. On weekends, the place had a heartbeat Clara Baines could hear, steady as the strokes of the cloth in her hand. 10 years old, pale hair slipping from a ribbon, she had rolled her sleeves the way her mother taught her. Work is done properly or not at all. She made slow, careful circles over the brass rake of the staircase, buffing away fingerprints that didn't belong to her and never would. Invisible, that was the word for her. Invisible when bellhops rushed past without seeing the bucket at her knees. Invisible when suited men laughed too loudly at the concierge desk, when women in cream hats clicked polished nails on marble. Even the scent of lemon polish seemed to pass through her, sharp and clean, leaving behind nothing but the sheen she coaxed from metal. Clara liked invisibility, not the kind that made you small, but the kind that made you still. It was easier to listen that way, to see the world without it seeing you back. She learned the rhythm of mornings, the conference badges that swayed at 9, the tour buses fanning out at 10, the lull at 11 when the hotel exhaled. In the East Corridor, light spilled through tall windows onto carpet patterned like ripples in sand. Her mother, Mrs. Baines, head maid of the Ashford, moved with silent authority. If anyone could glide, it was her, Elena Baines, with steady hands, an unflappable voice, and eyes that took in messes before they happened. She would glance at Clara sometimes, an acknowledgement without words. "This helps us both." Clara dusted a side table beneath a vase of lilies and let the world's murmur soak into her. A man hurried by, brow pinched, phone in hand. Japanese?" he asked a housekeeper pushing a cart. The housekeeper winced. "Maybe the front desk, sir." The man muttered something short and rough in a language that unfurled in Clara's chest like the memory of rain on tatami mats. Before she could think not to, she took a step forward. "Suma Mason," she said softly. "Excuse me." He stopped as if the floor had shifted under him. She gestured to the paper in his hand, glanced at the paragraph, then translated, a thread of meaning pulled cleanly from a knot. 3 sentences later his shoulders loosened. He bowed, a small, grateful half-moon. When she turned back to the lilies, a tall man in a charcoal vest was watching. He held a stack of menus, his dark hair swept neatly back. The lapel pin on his chest glinted, 2 golden crossed keys. Mr. Lucien Voss, the maitre d' of the rooftop restaurant, precision in human form. He said nothing, only filed her away with that cool, exact gaze of his and disappeared down a service corridor. Chapter 2. The woman in the cream hat. The woman arrived like a correction. Cream hat, cream gloves, cream smile that didn't quite warm. She spoke to the concierge in precise English, and when he failed to grasp the urgency of her question, her voice shifted, Japanese edged with ice. Clara saw the effect travel like a chill through the lobby. Executives were summoned, polite smiles multiplied, the air thickened with apology. Mr. Alden Curse, director of something important, the kind of man whose watch showed not time but status, stepped in. His jaw held a rehearsed patience. He listened. He nodded. He did not understand a word. "Where is Mr. Ashford?" the cream-hatted woman asked finally, in English that glinted like cut crystal. "Mr. Ashford will attend the meeting upstairs," Curse replied smoothly. "We are ensuring all parties are capable." Her eyes flicked toward the staff. That would be a start. Clara kept polishing. The lemon scent rose, bright and unwavering. But when she glanced at the reflection in the brass rail, she saw him again, Mr. Voss standing with that particular stillness of his, looking not at the cream hat, not at Curse, but at her. Clara, her mother's voice came behind her. East corridor now. But Mr. Voss cut across the ambient chatter like a violin note. Mrs. Baines, he said politely, may I borrow your daughter for 10 minutes? Her mother's glance was brief, calculating, protective. For what purpose, Mr. Voss? For the purpose of fixing what is about to go very wrong. Without waiting for assent that would have been denied, he bent and murmured, come. The service elevator held the smells of coffee and steam and something metallic. Mr. Voss pressed PH. Clara clasped her hands around the strap of her small cleaning caddy as if it could anchor her to the world she knew. Who is she? A waiter whispered as they stepped out into the hush and glass of the rooftop view. The city lay beneath like a map. Linen white on every table, silver aligned like an army. She's exactly who we need, Mr. Voss said, or perhaps he only thought it. The words were so quiet they barely existed. He led her into a small lounge warmed by library lamps. The cream-hatted woman stood near the window, hands folded elegantly around her gloves. Alden Curse leaned over a folder, pretending to be at ease. This is the girl, Mr. Voss said. The maid's daughter. Curse didn't bother to hide skepticism. Clara's weight shifted to the balls of her feet. She wasn't sure whether to stand or sit. Mr. Voss gestured to an armchair. Sit, his eyes told her, please. The cream-hatted woman studied Clara as one studies a puzzle whose missing piece might suddenly materialize. Who taught you Japanese? She asked in English. Clara folded her hands in her lap. My mother's friend, she said. His name was Haruto. The woman's gaze sharpened, the slightest tremor passing through the planes of her expression. Haruto what? She asked quietly. Akii, Clara said. Haruto Akii. The woman looked down at the gloves in her hands as if checking whether they still belonged to her. When she looked up again, a shadow had softened behind her eyes. I'm Eiko Sato, she said. Let us speak in Japanese, if you don't mind. Yoroshiku wangai shimasu, Clara replied, bowing her head the exact degree a respectful student bows to a teacher. It was automatic, a reflex engraved by years of letters and careful corrections. They spoke. The light moved along the window like time made visible. Clara didn't think of the weight in the room. She thought of evenings when electricity flickered and her mother lit candles that made golden islands on their second-hand table. She thought of Haruto's letters, their shoji paper smell, the small ginkgo leaf he once taped to a page, its veins delicate as script. Precision matters, his tidy handwriting had told her. It is a kind of love. When Eiko began to test her idioms, honorifics, the kind of layered politeness foreigners rarely hear, much less use, Clara's mouth found the ladder of Keigo and climbed. She didn't push her voice, she placed it. And in the placing, the room made room for her. Mr. Curse's smile went thin by degrees. Eventually, he stopped pretending to follow. When the last test curled like steam into the ceiling, Eiko nodded once. She spoke in English, not to Mr. Voss or Curse, but to the idea of Clara. He told me about you years ago in one of his letters. There is a little girl, he wrote, who answers perfect questions with better questions. She will grow into her understanding like a tree into its shadow. Clara's breath hitched. He wrote to you. He was my uncle. Eiko's expression did not change, but her voice thickened on the last word. He died 2 summers ago. Clara closed her hand inside her other hand, fingers pressing palm, the way she had learned to hold grief so it would not spill. The room's quiet took on a vibration, the way silence hums in a church. Mr. Voss's gaze softened. We need you upstairs, he said. Right now. Chapter 3. The billionaire Lionel Ashford's presence entered a room before he did. People straightened in his wake like iron filings aligning to a magnet. His face on magazine covers was handsome in a weathered way. In person, it was handsomer still, because it was alive with the intensity of someone who forgets to sleep. He stood at the head of the boardroom table, fingers splayed on wood that had never known a scratch. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed a skyline so crisp it looked cut with a knife. A digital clock glared red numbers, every minute a punch. "Does anyone here speak Japanese?" he had asked. It came out like an accusation. No one had answered. Now Mr. Voss crossed the threshold with a child. Alden Kurtz's mouth twitched. "We're past theater, Lucian." The billionaire didn't move at first. His eyes took in the white blouse too clean for a hotel maid's daughter, the neat ribbon, the shoes polished within an inch of their lives. He looked at Clara as if she were a trick the morning had played on him. Mr. Ashford's anger was a living thing, hot, seen. But under it Clara saw it because she had a knack for seeing what people thought they hid. Something hurt, something lonely. "Sir," Mr. Voss said, voice polite enough to pass inspection. "This is Clara Baines. She will resolve the misunderstanding with Sato Holdings." The name turned Lionel's gaze to Eiko Sato, already seated, glove-less, watching without blinking, and back again. His jaw shifted. "All right," he said at last, clipped. "Prove it." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a contract annotated in 2 languages, English and Japanese, with ink that looked like it had been spilled in frustration rather than placed with intention. It was the 4th version in 3 days. People were tired. The worst mistakes happen when people are tired. Clara stood on tiptoe to reach the table and drew the folder to the edge so she could see. She was aware of 18 eyes, pretending not to watch a girl who wore her mother's uniform like armor. She read the kanji out loud first, quietly, obediently. Then she stopped. "Who wrote this version?" she asked. Alden Kurtz raised a hand. "I consolidated the previous drafts. Legal assisted." "This clause," she said, touching it with a clean finger, "says, upon termination, the assets may be returned to the managing partner at its discretion." But the Japanese version says, "Upon termination, the assets shall be surrendered immediately and irrevocably to the managing partner by the non-managing partner." Kurtz frowned. "That's what it means." "No," Clara said politely. She pointed to the choice of surrender, Chinese letter versus Chinese letter. "Here you're not just returning, you're forfeiting with implied fault. And the phrase, by the non-managing partner, is not in the English at all." She looked up, composed. "Which is us?" Lionel Ashford's attention focused like a lens. "You're saying we'd be giving them the right to strip us bare?" "In this version of the Japanese, yes." "I didn't," Kurtz began. Clara reached for the draft beneath. "This earlier version uses Chinese letter, return, which aligns with the English and with the email summary." She tapped the page gently. Someone performed an edit that would be obvious to a native speaker, but invisible to someone leaning on translation software. Mr. Voss's eyes slid to Kurtz and back. Eiko Sato was very still. "We did not insert that," she said. "We have been trying to remove it." A silence fell that felt less like quiet and more like the breath before a storm. Clara placed the offending draft next to the previous one, aligning corners. She put 2 fingers on the problematic phrase, firm without force. "This is what is breaking your negotiations," she said to Lionel. "And this is what's costing you sleep." Lionel's mouth did a thing it had not done all morning, softened. It shocked the boardroom more than if he had shouted. "Can you fix it?" he asked. Clara's answer was not prideful, not timid. "Yes, sir. If you allow me to talk to them, I can tell them what you meant." Lionel Ashford, a man who bought and sold skyscrapers like chess pieces, looked at a girl who polished brass and gave orders without raising her voice. "Do it." Chapter 4. The call they brought in a screen, men with cufflinks. Women with legal pads. Mr. Voss positioned a chair for Clara at the head, but to the side, the place where interpreters sit who are more than interpreters. The call connected. 4 faces in Tokyo, light different there, accents familiar to Clara's ears, the way autumn rain is familiar. The elder man wore dignity like a suit. A younger man's hair fell into his eyes. He looked like he might argue for sport. Two women flanked them, one with kindness in her mouth, one with skepticism in her eyes. Mr. Ashford began in English, precise, stripped of flourish. Aiko translated into Japanese elegantly until the conversation reached the claws and the river jammed with trunks. Clara breathed in past the noise. She stood, bowed. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, she said. Forgive my interruption. The younger man blinked. The elder man's eyebrows rose a fraction, and that fraction contained an entire room of surprise. Clara described the error, not as a fault in them or in her company, but as a misalignment in language, a bridge built a half-inch to the left. She used honorifics like she'd been given the keys to a house and remembered to wipe her feet. When she explained the two words, Chinese letter versus Chinese letter, the older man leaned in. And you are, I am nobody, she said, and heard Aiko's indrawn breath. I helped my mother at the hotel, but my teacher was Mr. Haruto Akii. Years ago, the older man's mouth softened. Akii Haruto was my friend. The younger man gave a short laugh that was not unkind. Haruto-san always had a way of finding students. Clara delivered Lionel's intent like an offering. She didn't over-translate, she didn't domesticate. She kept the dignity of both languages intact. The room on the screen shifted. Shoulders loosened. The woman with skepticism in her eyes took out a pen. When the corrections were written and the river ran again, the elder man said, Your keigo is clean. Clara bowed deeper. Japanese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Japanese 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 letter, she said. Thank you for your kindness. The call ended not with applause, but with agreement, a more useful sound. Lionel turned to the living people in his room. His anger had drained, leaving him looking younger and more tired. Who put that clause back in? He asked, and when he asked it, he meant, who tried to sell me naked to a storm? Eyes moved, not quickly. No one wants to see this. Mr. Voss held the gaze steady. Aiko raised her chin an inch. It was Curse who broke. We were under pressure, he said. I asked legal for a stronger position. The associate thought. Legal did not insert it, Mr. Voss said gently. I asked them. Curse's eyes flicked. A calculation faltered. Lionel did not shout. He did not have to. Silence did the stripping. Clear your desk, Lionel said at last, voice even. You can fight the termination if you wish. You will lose. Curse's jaw clenched, then unclenched. He did not look at Clara again as he left. Later, the board would call it decisive leadership. To Clara, it felt like a door closing on a room where someone had been practicing breaking things. Chapter 5. The letters we keep. The hotel changed that afternoon in a way only people who notice quiet things would notice. Staff who once handed Clara napkins now handed her cups of tea with the lid not quite on so she could smell the jasmine. People who had floated past her as if she were a small obligation now nodded like they had seen a sunset in a window they hadn't known existed. Mr. Voss found her in the lounge, stacking chairs with both hands as if it were an important job, which it was. He said nothing for a moment, then, very clean work. Clara shrugged one shoulder the way you do when a compliment has the right weight and you don't want to drop it. Eiko Sato appeared. Without her hat and gloves, she looked younger, less immovable. May I ask you something? She said. Clara looked up from the chair she was aligning. Yes, ma'am. Eiko held out an envelope. The paper was thick, the edges uneven. On it, in neat hand, was written, To the girl who calls herself my student. I found this among my uncle's papers, Eiko said. I did not know how to send it. He addressed it to the Ashford. He wrote it the week before he died. Clara took the envelope like it might fall to ash. She didn't open it immediately. She had learned the discipline of waiting for private things. Thank you, she said, for trusting me with it. It is you who trusted us, Eiko replied. Then with a half-smile that might have been a mirror of Haruto's once, tell your mother her discipline made something beautiful. Clara nodded. For a moment, she looked very young and very old at once. That evening, Mrs. Baines and her daughter sat on a bench just inside the revolving doors, the hotel's night humming the way machines hum when they have nothing to prove. Clara slid a thumb beneath the envelope seal and lifted. Inside, 3 pages of clean script. A small pressed ginkgo leaf fell into her lap, the same warm green turned paper brown, the veins delicate as secrets. Little Clara Haruto had written, "You will grow beyond the size of your hands. Do not be afraid when rooms are too small for what you know. Language is a bridge and a mirror. Build, and you will see who you have been the whole time." Clara read aloud until her mother's hand found hers. They did not speak for a while. The city light flickered on wet pavement outside. Somewhere a taxi honked twice, patient. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," Clara said finally, not for false modesty, but because she believed it. "No," her mother agreed. "You did what you always do. You were exact. People finally noticed." They sat until the ginkgo leaf warmed in Clara's palm. Chapter 6. The boardroom again the next morning. Rumors were a low tide. The maid's daughter, perfect Japanese. Alden curse gone. The story traveled faster than an email because it contained the one thing emails never do, heart. At the daily briefing, Lionel surprised everyone by arriving early. His tie was straight. His eyes were clearer than yesterday's. He looked as if he'd slept 4 hours instead of 2. It was practically a vacation. "Before we begin," he said, "Miss Baines has something to say." Clara wanted to evaporate into the polished table. She didn't like speeches. She liked sentences that did their work without making a show of it. But Lionel's eyes had a question in them and maybe a plea. She stood beside the coffee urn, small and steady. "I don't have a speech," she said, "just this. People don't always look like where they've been. My mother cleans this building, I polish brass, and I also learned to read your contracts." She glanced at Lionel, then at Eiko Sato, who had joined the meeting without her hat, her hair pulled back with a simple black ribbon. "Skills don't disappear because your life changes, they wait. And sometimes," she added, "they wait for someone else to look." She bowed, sat. The room, a room full of people who sell certainty for a living, was quiet for the correct measure of time, then moved on. Agenda item 1. But the air had shifted by some invisible degree, closer to breathable. After Lionel called Clara and her mother into his office, the place with windows like a god's view. There were pictures on the credenza. Not many. A boy with wild hair, a woman laughing, a small sailboat frozen mid-skip across blue. "I used to think the story of my life was how hard I worked," Lionel said, leaning on the desk as if the wood knew him. "Then my wife died, and my son stopped speaking to me, and the story of my life became silence." He looked at Clara, then at Mrs. Baines. "Thank you for cutting through it." Mrs. Baines, who had dealt with men's gratitude and anger for years without owning either, inclined her head. "We are grateful to work where work is seen," she said. Lionel's mouth twitched. He reached for a folder and slid it to Clara. "A scholarship," he said, as if it were a small thing that didn't stab him with his wife's absence and his son's anger. "To the Ashford Foundation School Program. Any language you want. Japan if you ever want to go home." "My home is here," Clara said, then added, "because the truth has degrees, and there, both." "Both is good," Lionel said softly, as if he had never allowed himself both. "Both is honest." Chapter 7. Fire alarms that aren't it could have ended there, a neat moral pressed like the ginkgo leaf. But life doesn't sew up on cue. 2 days later, the fire alarm on the 12th floor screamed that particular scream smoke makes when it's not sure it's welcome. Staff evacuated calmly, guests less so. The source turned out to be a server closet, overheated, failing. Someone, no, not someone, something had been tampered with. It was Mr. Voss who found the loose Ethernet cable with its teeth scratched, the log file with its timestamps just wrong enough. It was Clara who noticed the pattern, files accessed, copied, altered, and resealed in the time between midnight and 1. She had learned to see fingerprints where others thought there were none. In Lionel's office, the screen glowed with proof. Not Alden Curse. He had already handed in his access card with a throwaway line about headhunters and better offers. It was a junior systems analyst with a gambling debt, small, visible, desperate, paid recently by a company with a name that was not a company. When security walked him out, the young man looked lost in a way that made Clara's stomach go cold. People do stupid things because they are stupid. They also do stupid things because they are drowning. "Don't crush him," she heard herself say. Lionel looked at her. "He tried to sink us. He tried to float himself," she replied. "Maybe it's the same, maybe it is." Lionel stared down at his hands, then up. "I'll see what can be done," he said, surprising himself with the man he was becoming. Chapter 8. A word like home. A week later, a letter arrived with a stamp that made Clara's heart move in her chest, a stylized crane in flight. The return address read, Kyoto. It was from the elder man on the screen, the one with dignity like a coat he'd worn all his life. Inside, another letter, another leaf. Ginkgo, but this one not pressed. Fresh, bright. It would brown in air like love does if you keep it too long. "Little Clara," it began, "because some things should stay as they are. We are opening a small office in London. We will need someone to check our Keigo someday. Also, there is a school in Kyoto. Scholarships for people who build bridges nobody else thought to build. If someday your both includes a season here, we will be honored." Clara put the leaf between 2 pages of Haruto's letter and set it under a heavy book. She would carry the weight and the leaf would keep its shape. That night on the roof, the city lay out like a promise. The wind was colder, winter would come. Mrs. Baines, in a sweater Lionel's assistant had left discreetly folded on her chair, stood beside her daughter. "What did he write?" she asked. "That I have both," Clara said. Her mother slipped an arm around her shoulders. "You had both before they knew you had either." They stood like that a long time. Mr. Voss passed through the restaurant below like a pendulum. Eiko Sato sat in a corner with tea, her hat on the chair's back like a tether to a different version of herself. Somewhere a table laughed. Somewhere a baby cried. The kinds of noises that tell you the world will keep going, whether or not you stand still. "I think," Clara said into the wind, "that my teacher would have liked it here." Mrs. Baines made a soft sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "He's here," she said, "in your mouth when you speak, in your hands when you place your words." Below them, Lionel stepped out onto a terrace alone. He took a phone from his pocket and stared at it like it might bite. Then he put it to his ear. "Hey," he said after a long breath. "It's Dad." No one heard the voice on the other end but Lionel and maybe the city. Chapter 9. Everything that changes and everything that doesn't. By the time spring softened the edges of the concrete, the hotel had settled into a new story. The brass gleamed. The lilies filled vases with an impossible whiteness. People still checked in and checked out. They still brought their quarrels and their honeymoons, their secrets and their small reliefs. Clara came on weekends still, though now she sometimes wore a plain gray dress that wasn't a uniform. She carried a notebook with squares on the pages, not lines. It felt right that way, characters made of boxes on a page that had always made room for her in its neat geometry. She helped with translations when asked, when it mattered, when using her voice would get someone to where they were headed a little more honestly. She didn't do it to be seen. She did it so that language would do its job, the job she loved it for. In the cafeteria, people no longer whispered about the maid's daughter, because names had replaced rumors. Clara, Mrs. Baines, Lucian, Lionel, Eiko. Even the silver-haired executive who had once called her a child now greeted her with a nod that contained no condescension at all, only something like respect, and perhaps a pinch of awe. Once in the elevator, Lionel looked at her sideways and said, "You know, I used to think learning was what you did until you got to the good part. And now I think learning is the good part." Clara smiled. "Haruto would have liked that. I hope he would have liked me. He would have told you to fix your keigo and then invited you to tea." Lionel laughed, a real laugh, not the bark that meant he was trying to pretend he found something funny. I'll settle for tea. Chapter 10. The reply months later at a gala that made the chandeliers earn their keep. A man with a microphone asked Lionel to say a few words. He did. He thanked investors and friends and the invisible hands that keep the visible world from collapsing. He said, and there's someone else, and people waited for a name that would add glamour. He said, Clara Baines, and a woman by the kitchen door put a hand over her mouth to keep the surprise from falling out. Clara did not walk up. She did not curtsy. She stood exactly where she was and inclined her head. If you didn't know the world had tilted, you might think nothing had happened. Later, when the band was playing something that made 30 shoes look like water, Lionel found her by the grand staircase, looking at her reflection in the polished rail. It reflected the whole gilded room in a curve. The curve made everyone look like they belonged to the same world. "Do you remember the first thing you said?" he asked. Clara tilted her head. "Which first thing?" He smiled. "The one that stopped me fuming like a boiler, in that room where everyone pretended not to be afraid," she thought. "I said, I do." He nodded. "You did." And the thing was, she had been speaking the whole time. In letters to a man she had never met, in the way she placed her cloth on a tarnished tray, in the choice to keep a ginkgo leaf intact for years between the pages of a book, in the consent to enter a room that did not yet have a chair in it for her and sit down anyway. "That's what I do" meant in the end, not a boast, but a promise. A bridge laid between people who had forgotten how to cross. Epilogue. Ginkgo, the day Clara left for Kyoto, was wet. The kind of rain that would make the smell of earth rise and the ginkgo trees shed their fans like the hotel's linen shed its folds at night. She stood with her mother in front of the revolving doors. Mr. Voss handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For precision," he said, inside a fountain pen. The note in Mr. Voss's hand read, "Use in case of emergencies and poetry." Aiko hugged her. It was brief and correct and broke every rule Aiko had for public. Lionel put nothing in her hands. He had learned the difference between giving and placing a weight. "Come home," he said instead, "when both feels like too much." Clara slipped the pressed ginkgo leaf into the front pocket of her backpack, the fresh one she would pick in Kyoto. On the plane, she wrote in a square notebook with a pen that made careful lines. She wrote to Harudo, though the address was no longer a place you could find on a map. She wrote, "Sensei, I kept our precision, and I spoke when it mattered." Down below, the hotel gleamed like a ship in a harbor, brass rails bright, lilies shockingly white. Somewhere in its heart, a boardroom waited for the next man to pound on the table and ask the wrong question too loudly. And somewhere, not long from that moment, in that same room where nobody spoke Japanese and the billionaire was fuming again, a girl would walk through a door she had opened herself and reply perfectly. And the room, every time, would have no choice but to listen.